So hey anime fans. The series name is What If Naruto Got Harem with Venom? So let's start the series. The Namikaze children's birthdays fell on this dismal and dark night. Day was also a significant date for Naruto and his sister Mito. Naruto was now a highly esteemed apprentice blacksmith, and Mito was now a full-fledged shinobi. With two children attaining the legal age of 16, and one of them joining the shinobi, this would be a significant event for any other family. For the Namikaze household, this was not the case. The explanation was straightforward. The 9-Fox no Kitsune had been locked into Mito when the disguised Uchiha, who was thought to be Madara Uchiha, assaulted the hamlet during the birth of Naruto and Mito Namikaze. For the new parents, the decision was a terrible one. Unfortunately, Naruto's mother and father were forced to reseal the 9-Fox inside Mito. The justification was that since the previous two hostesses had been female, there was no reason to break the custom. Did they not realize that women might have made better hosts? Both parents promised not to favor one child over the other, but nobody had the slightest clue of what would transpire over the years. This was a hopeful but doomed ideal, hoping that the attention both children received was evenly distributed throughout. The intimate relationship between Mito and her brother had an unidentified impact on the Namikaze heirs as they grew up. Because Mito was given a different seal than what was intended. In the previous years, Naruto's developing coils had suffered catastrophic damage because to a minor leakage of Kurama's core energy. The coils were essentially destroyed by the tailed beast's core energy while they were forming, when they were at their weakest. As soon as Mito began displaying core energy in her body, this was noticed. Both parents were, of course, taken aback and a little relieved. With the shinobi's hazardous task, at least one of their beloved children wouldn't be in danger. With time, hatred grew inside Naruto's heart, wishing the world operated that way. He observed how the village and his parents treated Mito with dignity and respect, but Naruto was essentially treated like a helpless kid who was constantly accompanied by Kakashi. That wasn't too horrible in the open. The man had repeatedly tried to figure out how to get core energy to flow through Naruto's body, but each time had failed. Every setback served as a sobering reminder of Naruto's true identity as a civilian. Someone who could only assist the village by performing menial activities. That is, until Naruto's sickness attracted the attention of a certain dark character. Since the snake is constantly planning and scheming, I'm sure you can all guess who this is. His preparations were put on hold for a while since Naruto was too much of an anomaly to ignore. Legendary Sannin had to examine him to find out exactly what science had to say about the youngster. After all, he might acquire an unwitting spy if he were to win over one of the headmaster's offspring as an ally. The youngster also appeared to have a natural aptitude for many kinds of science, which pleased the snake because it meant that the boy wasn't entirely afraid of what the snake did. However, just to be safe, he never showed his fictitious apprentice too much of his dark work. Naruto developed with his sister. His inability to use core energy was the only thing that prevented him from doing other commonplace, everyday tasks. Naruto has become disinterested in research following the final betrayal of legendary Sannin. How could you, after all, keep going down the same path as a psychopath like legendary Sannin? Instead, he asked his parents one day what he could do to aid the town, and they gave him a range of answers. In addition to allowing them to spend time together, Naruto's father believed that Naruto would be an excellent assistant/receptionist to aid with his responsibilities as headmaster. On the other side, Naruto's mother had a far more original concept that piqued Naruto's interest: the blacksmithing art. It was an outdated ability that had lost most of its use in recent years. Naruto urged his parents to find any blacksmiths in the city who would take him on because he believed he would never be interested in it. He did not want any of them to be aware of the specific identity of the person the headmaster was requesting. It took a few months until a struggling blacksmith responded to the headmaster's office. but this way he would get a blacksmith who didn't want him just to claim he had the head master's son working for him. With eagerness, too. The poor old blacksmith nearly had a heart attack when he realized who had become his apprentice, but he handled Naruto with wisdom and respect, treating him like any other hopeful boy, a total moron. Naruto began on the day he received word from his father, which satisfied Naruto as well. Instead of treating the headmaster's kid with the horror and awe that many locals would, this man was willing to teach him just like he would any other boy. This occurred at the young age of 14, which is the typical age for all youngsters from the upper class who attend private schools. Many of the other guys and girls in the school were taken aback. A youngster with such a pedigree was performing such a manual, filthy, and subpar job. Naruto thoroughly enjoyed it. By the time Mito graduated from the academy, Naruto had already worked for his master for 2 years. During his apprenticeship, Naruto faced both physical and mental challenges, which initially startled him. Because he had been striking that big hammer so frequently, he realized that some kind of physical labor would be required. He had no idea that he would also need to carefully focus on the process of melting metal from ore and then forming it into something useful. When Naruto had a moment to spare, he blinked and wiped the perspiration and dirt off his forehead before slamming his hammer down on the metal with a thunderous roar. As soot from the forge flew up into his face, he coughed and heard his master laugh croakily. He turned to see the elder man standing there, his back bowed and crooked from years of slaving over the same forge. Aside from his steely blue eyes, which revealed a clever and perceptive mind behind them, everything about him appeared aged and worn. With a crooked smile on his face, the man hobbled over to Naruto and peered down at the tanto he had been working on thus far this month. His father was the one who commissioned it for his sister, who was about to graduate. The very concept of calling her sister aroused a tiny jealousy. Though he instantly suppressed that feeling, he couldn't help but feel angry because what happened wasn't her fault. As he smashed the hammer down on his hand, Naruto cried out, "Fuck!" His thoughts had strayed for only a few seconds, but he suffered the price. The boy had remained aloof this month since the headmaster had ordered this weapon for his only shinobi child, so Tegashi Nisako arched an eyebrow at Naruto. Tegashi was left with a foul taste in his mouth. It seemed as though Naruto's father was making fun of his son for not becoming a shinobi. That was obviously untrue. Instead, Naruto's father only speculated that his son could have desired a piece of him to accompany his sister on her travels. Then, how could he make a sword that woman could use? She was excited to meet her brother, and Mito jumped on her heels. He was very modest and kind to others, and she loved him very much. Since he lacked core energy, he was not raised with the same mindset as a shinobi, which is why he was, like many shinobi, considerably friendlier and less arrogant. She reached the smithy's entrance. As they relished their infrequent moments together, her parents were at her side, arms intertwined. Since they hardly ever saw Naruto except when he returned home late at night after working at the forge from early in the morning until late at night, they planned to surprise him. Then they went into the blunted kama and went to the counter that was empty at the moment. They tapped the desk bell and waited for Tegashi to come. The other member of Naruto's household was standing there when the man limped in, his eyes widening. The man leaned against the counter and said, "Lord Headmaster, Lady Naruto Mom and Little Mito, what brings you to my store?" His expression softened, but he was still in disbelief. Naruto's father smiled broadly at the elderly guy. As a young shinobi, he had visited this store so frequently that he was familiar with every detail. He put his hand on Mito's shoulder, who appeared to be on the verge of exploding with joy. "Here to pick up Mito's tanto," said Naruto's father again, grinning at the elderly man with a mischievous expression. "Brat, that tanto done?" Tegashi yelled at the top of his magnificent lungs after giving a gentle snort and turning to face the back of the store. "Yeah, you old geezer it is," was Naruto's remark, which surprised the family even more than hearing their kid mentioned in such a tone. Mito gave a little giggle. That was undoubtedly her brother. He was always such a generous person. With Tonto in a sheath, Naruto left. When he saw his parents, he had a startled but joyful expression on his face. His gaze then strayed to his sister, and a twinge of jealousy returned, but he suppressed it. "You did it! I knew you could!" he said as he gazed at the band on her forehead. Mito smiled, leaped at her brother, and gave him a tight hug before releasing her grip and moving away. Her brother was closer to their father's height of 5 feet 10 inches, while she was 5 feet 5 inches and only somewhat taller than their mother. When comparing the siblings, it was easy to determine which parent each of them inherited. Naruto was a near-perfect replica of his father, while Mito was more of a hybrid, with a facial structure similar to her father's but still feminine, and hair that was nearly identical to her mother's except that it was shoulder length rather than waist length. Mito looked at the Tonto in disbelief as Naruto extended it towards her. She was aware that they had visited the blacksmith for a reason, but she was surprised that Naruto had given her a present. Naruto replied, "For you, Mito, for when you're out there protecting Hyde Ninja Village. This way I can in some form or another join you." As though he had been practicing the line in his head all the time to make it sound plausible. His father did not see the tense, almost false smile on his face, but she did. With a shriek, Mito took the blade out of its sheath and held it in one hand. She examined the weapon. This Tonto was different, even though it didn't look any different from any others she had seen. This wasn't just any shinobi weapon, it was created just for her, making it intimate. Tears filled her eyes as she gazed at her brother. Her lip quivered as she gave him another, stronger hug and said, "I'll treasure it always, Naruto." "Thank you." Both the Naruto mother and father grinned. They both thought, "We have the perfect family," as he put an arm around his wife and held her tight. Tegashi shared Mito's thoughts. Only Naruto had a different idea. He had bigger dreams. Better things. The night went by without a hitch. After all, the Namikaze family was celebrating Nito's accomplishment, so they left the blacksmith and went to a basic ramen restaurant to dine. They spent several hours eating and chit-chatting in the store. With hardly a word out, Naruto's thoughts were fixed on something. When Naruto's father realized something was bothering his son, he made sure to find out what it was before the night was finished. He had to see to it that his handicapped kid was taken care of because Naruto was his most precious child. It was well into the morning by the time they arrived to the Namikaze estate. Mito and Naruto mom laughing when intoxicated. The girls were a little too excited about their decision to toast some sake. With 2 beer bottles in his hand, Naruto's father abruptly asked, "Naruto, mind sharing a drink with your old man?" Naruto said, Sure, Dad." He wasn't entirely sure why his father had asked him to join him for another drink. He dismissed it and followed his father outdoors. They gazed up at the starry night sky while remaining silent. You could always see the sky so well in Hyde Ninja Village, which was a really lovely sight. Several times, Naruto's father reminded himself that one of the things worth fighting for was his son, who was standing beside him. He grinned pitifully. He had hoped to be there to congratulate his son on finishing the Shinobi Academy, but he also felt a great sense of comfort that his son would never be in danger. However, Naruto's father was aware that this was not what Naruto desired. His son was clearly upset and furious over his sister's accomplishments. He sighed and ran a hand through his hair before saying to Naruto, "Naruto, I'm sorry." With a puzzled expression on his face, Naruto turned to face his father. His father essentially favored him over Mito, so he had no idea what he was apologizing for. Similarly, he asked his mother, "What do you mean?" in a perplexed tone. "I know you want to be a shinobi. I've always wanted the best for you. Tried to give you everything you could possibly have, If we had noticed the effects of the Nine Foxes' core energy, then you would be celebrating with your sister becoming a shinobi. I know, you hate her," Nuda's father said, leaning against the railing on the back porch and grinning at his son before laughing as if attempting to make amends. Nuda's eyes grew wide, revealing his secret. He didn't hate his sister, did he? He believed he always concealed his feelings over the entire Nine Fox accident well enough to go unnoticed. Nuda nearly choked on the feelings he had been suppressing, saying, "I don't hate Mito, Dad. I just envy her, and at the same time I am angry towards her, to you and Mum." Even if he was finally able to get them off his mind by uttering them out loud, the wounds were still as raw and terrible. His eyes threatened to well up with tears as he gazed at his father. He croaked out, "But I don't hate any of you," before sobbing as he attempted to control them, the bottle and his fingers cracking slightly from the emotions surging through him. The father of Nerdu drew his kid into an awkward embrace and held him for a short while before releasing him. After smiling at his son's bashful expression, he winked and remarked, "Our secret." Nerdu said that he felt better after the awkward hug by laughing and then nodding. After drinking the remainder of his beer, Nerdu's father turned and headed back to the home. He was truly shocked by what Nerdu had confessed to him and a little concerned, but he could understand Nerdu's feelings since it was understandable. As Nerdu exclaimed, "Dad!" his father paused and turned to face his son with a curious expression. "Thanks for listening. I'm going to go for a walk for a little while around the village," he said. The father of Nerdu bowed to his son with a sorrowful grin and said, "Any time, Nerdu, I'm here. Your mother's here, be careful and I'll tell the ANBU to give you some space, but they won't be completely gone." Before Nerdu left for the back of the garden and through the gate, he gave the thumbs up. His father then turned to face the shadows at the doorway and said, "Cat, watch him please. Just keep some space," in a bored tone. Abruptly, a woman emerged gracefully from the darkness. Her name came from her purple hair, which was formed and colored like a cat. She bowed respectfully in response to her commands, saying, "Yes, Lord Headmaster. As you wish." She then retreated into the darkness and pursued her prey. One significant thing they all overlooked that evening was a big blazing streak that was racing across the sky in the direction of the Forest of Death. Nerdu simply continued to stroll without really thinking about where he was heading. Finally able to appreciate the night and its calm, he kept his thoughts to himself. Everyone in this community respected him greatly because he was the son of the headmaster, so he knew he was safe. A bonus, he believed, was that he was constantly protected by a deadly and well-trained ANBU. The telltale sound barrier was shattered when a tremendous crack tore through the night sky. He clutched at his aching ears as he yanked his head up and looked around wildly. He witnessed it, blazing like a sight from the depths of hell, a meteor speeding madly toward the village. Somewhere in the Forest of Death, it curled downward, and as it burned, the strong light made it nearly hard to see. There was an earthquake-like vibration across the forest, a loud explosion as dirt was hurled into the air, and the trees were being torn apart as it continued on its path. However, the meteor continued on, tearing into the ground before smashing through the barrier separating the settlement from the Forest of Death. He was abruptly in the air as it was directly approaching him and the surrounding housing. He was hauled away from the location where the meteor was grinding its way through the now awakened community by the powerful arms of an ANBU. With the Lord Headmaster's son in her arms, Kat skidded to a stop. She focused on the meteor that struck a complex of buildings. She let go of Nerdu and examined him closely as the cries of bystanders caught her attention. Kat politely inquired Nerdu, "Are you unhurt, sir?" Like many other shinobi, she had been brainwashed to be devoted to Nerdu for a long time. His expression changed from shock to anger to horror before he screamed, "I'm fine, but those people in that building aren't. You need to get to them." Kat tensed, She was sworn to assist anyone in need in the hamlet, but she was also told not to leave Nerda's sight. Before pointing and shouting, "Go!" again, she noticed Nerda giving her a harsh look. With a swift nod, she pivoted on her heel and leaped for the debris and the helpless individuals inside. Other A and B would have been on their way to the disaster area after the military force was notified. A massive 8-legged creature stirred from within the jungle. It had not been able to capture prey to satisfy its insatiable desire for many, many months. With its sinister black eyes fixed on the gaping hole in the wall that kept it away from such delicious sacs of fluid, a gigantic huntsman's spider scuttled out of its burrow. It quickly skidded through the opening, followed closely by numerous more critters. Before a hail of kunai and spirit art descended from the skies, stopping or killing many of the creatures behind it, it just about made it through and into the city. But it didn't care. It was going to feed, and it would do so easily. The meteor was still scorching hot to the touch, even though it had stopped. Strangely enough, though, it was cooling down quickly. Its surface cracked, then grew into a huge hole, and something started to move from deep inside. A thick black ooze oozed from the heated rock with a grace that was almost fluid. This extraterrestrial life form was desperate to find a host, and there were plenty on this fertile planet, but it was in excruciating pain from the heat around it and the incapacitating sound of the collision. However, there was one that called to it in a lovely way. This organism was a sentient living form, as you can see. When not in a dormant state, this monster required to develop a symbiotic life bond with its host in order to survive and feed on anything it possessed. The host gained unthinkable power as a result. In its enthusiastic investigation of the wrecked area, the symbiote discovered a young woman pierced by barbed steel. For the time being, she would fulfill its purpose even though she was hardly alive. The woman coughed up a lot of blood as she watched the strange slime pooling out of the rock in front of her. She was crying because she didn't want to pass away here. Not like this. She had just arrived in Chunin, and now this foolish rock had about killed her. Before striking out and enclosing her body, she hardly even noticed the ooze rush towards her, tightly encircling her, drinking in her shape. It grabbed hold of her thoughts and ripped its way into her head. It exerted influence over the woman, forcing her to walk ahead and away from the barbed steel. Her memories were unlocked and eagerly devoured by it. The woman was a low-ranking member known as a Chunin, yet she was a highly skilled soldier known as a shinobi. Oh, how wonderful she is! The symbiote was shocked by its good fortune. This world was teeming with superhuman beings, and to think that it was considering traveling to the other habitable planet on the opposite side of the sun. The host's unique sense, the ability to perceive when she was in danger or about to be attacked, was exploited by the symbiote as it pushed its piece forward. It was quite simple. She could only tell that the attack was happening and not where or when it would occur. For its next host, the symbiote would enhance this capability. It had to have the man since it knew he was there and the terrible emotions it was releasing were so intoxicating. However, this aggressor needed to be dealt with first. The symbiote just drained away from the woman's body as though it were being washed away after taking all from her. The woman moaned as she fell to the ground. She knocked herself out with a strong sweat of her head off the floor. After that, the spider leaped and slammed down around the woman. It bared its teeth and sank its teeth into the woman's neck, piercing her spine, rendering her totally immobile from the neck down. It changed from being the hunter to the hunted as it started to fervently pump its toxins in. The spider was securely encircled by the symbiote as it launched itself again. Like a vice, much like a spider might do on its prey before feasting on it. Before the monster could even realize what was occurring, it wrestled it into surrender. It was easy to take possession of this creature, and it brought additional skills and tricks that would make its ultimate host a formidable foe. It was especially intrigued by the creature's web, which it believed would be most helpful. Its wall climbing, water walking, and webbing powers would be complete with that plus the little core energy it could now generate. Even though its final host was so close that it was almost possible to taste him, all would be well after working on this. Spider sense? The dying woman was left to face her terrible destiny as the symbiote-controlled spider fled. The woman was alive till she died a few moments later, but she was frowning at the mouth as the violent poison quickly melted away her insides and converted them to mush. From his protected location behind an archway at the end of the street, Naruto watched the carnage in awe and fear. As the ANBU and assisting shinobi worked quickly, they cleared any rock with spirit art and pulled civilians, dead or alive, from the debris. While extracting a man who needed to have his arm amputated at the elbow from a hazardous situation, Kat took in her surroundings. Men and women were screaming and wailing like it was from hell. With flames screaming and the smell of burning flesh filling the air, she returned her focus to Naruto and nearly froze as she noticed a giant huntsman spider sitting just above him, covered in slime and poised to attack. She yelled, "Huntsman!" and immediately launched a kunai from her side holster toward the spider with lethal accuracy. As they watched where the weapon was flying, other shinobi turned on their heels. They all sprang into action and sped in Naruto's direction. The kunai hit the spider before it could move, so he wasn't really in danger. Because it didn't want its host to be murdered before it could join him, the symbiote was startled when the kunai stuck itself in the spider's brain. The extraterrestrial was able to create a little opening for the kunai to kill the basic beast. The alien let go of the dead creature and pounced on the gullible human. Finally, it had achieved what it required: an ideal host. Naruto observed with perplexity as Kat froze and gazed at him. Though he was undoubtedly terrified when she yelled out "Huntsman," he nearly puked when she hurled the kunai straight at him, believing that the death and the devastation had caused her to lose her temper. He was pleased when the weapon flew over his head and struck something squishy. He grimaced as something trickled down and slapped him in the middle of his head before more of it rained down into his body. He looked up to see the now dead spider wedged firmly into the wall as multiple other bladed weapons fastened the dead monster onto the wall. "Great, I'm getting bled on all over," he thought gloomily, thinking that he would require a show. Then he abruptly stopped. After being pushed to his knees, he heard a terrible hissing and screeching sound and realized that whatever was covering his body was alive rather than just blood. This odd, alien liquid clawed at his body, causing him to scream and thrash at his clothes. His jaw was pulled firmly open as he felt an unseen hand tug his head back. Recognizing that this was a viscous black fluid, he kept screaming in terror as it started to totally envelop him. Before long, his entire body was covered in a skin-tight suit, and soon after that, it started to cover his face and pour into his open neck. The creature settled about him before solidifying like granite. It was underway. With the outfit still securely fastened to his body, Naruto gazed out of the headmaster's office window, displaying no symptoms of self-removal. However, he didn't mind because he felt this symbiote was fantastic, and was happy that his father shared his opinion. You see, he was swiftly brought to the headmaster's tower shortly after the black symbiotic thing had forcibly merged with him. Many ANBU were puzzled of how to respond to the situation, even though they had arrived within seconds of the incident. Since something had firmly wrapped itself around the headmaster's son, their training failed to take this into consideration, and as a result, the ANBU were uncertain of how to proceed. Fortunately, Kakashi was present. He surmised that Kakashi was on his way to the impact zone when an ANBU member must have informed him of Naruto's fate since, as soon as he landed, he approached Naruto with his hands up in a non-threatening manner. Kakashi was always a danger, what a joke. In his own way, he was constantly alert and prepared to take action. Kakashi quickly calmed down, though, and asked him a few questions to make sure it was Naruto. After receiving verbal assurance that he was fine and unaltered, he attempted to take Naruto to the tower, but the meteor-damaged building collapsed in on itself, trapping even more people in its lethal clutches. Being the obstinate individual that he was, Naruto immediately rushed in the direction of the debris and started yelling for the ANBU and any other military forces to assist the locals. He started pulling and yanking out debris as if it were nothing, and that's when the suit's power really came into play. Wooden boards and steel beams were all torn out and removed. He threw aside the concrete with one hand while lifting them up with the other. The ANBU had closely monitored him, but they were generally too busy trying to save lives while they awaited the arrival of the Lord Headmaster. One of the ANBU had insisted on dragging Naruto to the tower by force, but they were all forced to reconsider after receiving a very hard shove. One facet of Naruto's new talent was demonstrated when his push sent the ANBU hurtling through the air and smashing through a wall, sending it to the hospital's already overcrowded wound ward. Another thing that astounded them even more was his talent. He was able to span webs in a manner akin to that of a spider. In addition to firing webbing at people and tugging them out with thick black vines, thick black webbing was frequently used to reinforce trash to prevent it from falling from its position. Whatever it was, Naruto was having a great time in this costume. Other than making everything about him bigger, and even giving him additional powers, it showed no signs of doing anything. He was eager to give it another go. By then, his father had come with Mito and a distraught Naruto mother. Everyone was clearly at ease and unafraid of what was covering the youngster because Naruto had made such a significant contribution to the emergency relief effort. In just a few minutes, they found themselves in the headmaster's tower, where Kat provided a detailed account of what transpired. To Naruto's great amazement, the woman had an incredible memory. He was direct when it came to him. After explaining what had happened to him, I went on to explain what this was and how it affected him. ANBU's research and development received a sample of the suit. His mother and father were fighting over the suit, which ultimately led to what he was doing. Was it really a good idea to leave this deadly thing on their son given that it was a foreign entity, and that it had such terrible influence over the huntsman's spider? Normally, that would have been the right course of action, but for Naruto and his father, their thoughts were different because they were both influenced by similar emotions. The main reason why Naruto and his father were thrilled about the symbiote was because it allowed him to plainly be on par with Shinobi. They both fervently wanted him to keep the suit, and he was an experienced one at that. After all, they finally got what they desired, a boy who would kind of follow in his father's footsteps. Naruto had to agree that it was an amazing sight as he gazed at his reflection in the mirror. Wearing a tight, form-fitting suit from head to toe. What was this object attempting to make itself appear to be composed of lycra? He had to admit, though, that it was quite comfy. The costume has an intriguing design with white, big, egg-shaped lenses covering his eyes. His wrists had these strange small white squares on top of them, and his chest was shaped like a huge white spider that wrapped around to his back. There was a black dot in the center of each, but he assumed there was some thought behind it because it appeared to be the spot where the webbing shot from. However, the costume scared him a little. He could practically feel it in his thoughts, and he was certain that it was sentient. He was really alarmed by its movements and self-comfort, yet it showed no signs of malevolent intent. It was strange that he knew it wasn't from this world or that there were other worlds, at least according to the alien. Or was it also imparting knowledge to him on a scale? He looked down at his hands and shrugged to himself. He took a deep breath and thought to himself, "I wish I could just go back to my normal clothing." To his surprise it did, and he smiled to himself. The suit listened then. He heard his mother yell behind him, "By all that's holy in ramen!" He turned around, grinning, and answered her. He cheerfully chirped, trotted over to his mother, and gave her a hug, saying, "Told ya, Mum, nothing to fear. I'm still me." To her astonishment and delight, Naruto didn't frequently behave in this manner. It was a treat to see him behave this way because his attitude toward his family was at best erratic. She gave him a gentle giggle and a forehead kiss, focusing mostly on his facial expression. He sulked from the maternal love and wrinkled his nose. Well, at least we know it can be turned on and off. How do you feel in general? Asked Nuda's father, who sighed with relief. Nuda joyfully added, I feel amazing, Dad. I can't explain it, but I feel alive. I feel strong, like I could take on the world, and I think I could. You heard the reports, you saw the webbing, the amount of people I helped save. I'm almost like, well, a hero, while extending his arms back and grinning playfully. As she swung her legs on her chair and giggled in the corner, Mito added, Yeah, you're like a Spider-Man. Almost palming his face, Nuda only moaned. After shaking his head, he turned to face her and said, in a light-hearted manner, Really, Spider-Man? That's such a lame name. The symbiote snarled at Mito from within. It didn't know why, but it hated the name for some reason. Mito tightened her fist and raised her eyebrow. Leaping from her chair, she struck her brother in the head with a fist. To her amazement, he just caught her fist and blocked it. Nuda reached over and flicked Mito's nose, snorting with laughter. It's late, a lot happened tonight. Can we go home and pick this up tomorrow? He said wearily as he yawned and turned to face his parents. Sure. It has been a hectic day. Both of you go get some rest. Your mother and I will stay here for a while longer, said the father after he and his mother exchanged a look. With a hand on the double doors, Kakashi signaled the children to join him after pushing himself off a wall he was leaning against. It was a short walk back to their estate, and Nuda's thoughts were entirely focused on the symbiote within him. Somehow, he knew that things would become exciting again when he went to sleep. He was always watching something on the TV, so he really didn't want to know what Kakashi did when he stayed over after wishing his sister a good night. Nuda considered taking off his clothes to go to bed, but the garments just sank into his skin, leaving him only wearing shorts. It seems whatever this thing is, it reacts to my thoughts, he thought to himself. Though its appearance varies, it remains constant. Similar to a hinge. He pulled the quilt up and climbed into bed, shrugging. He closed his eyes as he laid on the silk sheets and fell asleep. Drip, drip, drip. His eyelids were suddenly forced open by a steady pouring sound, and he stiffened when he realized he was trapped in some kind of enormous web. Despite his struggles, the material was extremely sticky and made it difficult for him to move. In a desperate attempt to locate him, his eyes darted back and forth. As far as the eye could see in all directions, it resembled an unending pit of oily black webbing. In a matter of seconds, a massive phantom had materialized in front of the crippled Naruto. Held together by webbing threads, it was hollow and had two enormous white splotches for eyes that were looking at him. Taking a deep breath, Naruto opened his mouth and said, Yo, you the thing that's attached itself to me. With a grim smile, the monster ghost whispered, Yes, I am a symbiote. And he froze. Naruto blinked, then blinked again. He cocked his head to the side and asked warily, So, what do you want? The symbiote sounded feminine. With a somber chuckle, the symbiote said, You little host. You. Naruto swallowed, certain that the symbiote's desire for him was not a good indication. He scowled to himself. He had to understand why it desired him. The symbiote hissed again, perhaps realizing this, saying, You have so much core energy. Untapped, constantly being made. We feed upon it, it makes us strong. It will make you strong, we work with our hosts. We are no parasite. He blinked, then let out a breath he was unaware he was holding. He gazed at the creature, reflecting on how fortunate he was to have non-functioning core energy coils and a steady supply of core energy. Even if he couldn't move core energy, his body was still functioning. Because of his Uzumaki ancestry, he had a sizable core energy reservoir that, if unchecked, would poison him if it filled up to the point where it could hold no more core energy. This was a huge problem. This ultimately resulted in him frequently visiting the hospital to have it siphoned off to the point that he was on the verge of passing out from core energy fatigue. Nonetheless, it greatly aided in the creation of soldier tablets. The symbiote gave him a nod and said, "Yes, you see now. We give you power, strength, love, and all you ever wanted. In return, we feed on your core energy, we sustain ourselves. We grow stronger now by you." Although it was more likely to have a host do what it wants by manipulating its emotions, the symbiote kept the entire portion about it regulating his emotions a secret. Naruto nodded, pleased and relieved. For the final time in this encounter, he smiled at the symbiote and said, "Well then, we're going to do great things, you and I." With a terrifying cackle, the symbiote exclaimed, "YESSSSSSSSSSSSSSSS." At that moment, he became conscious. The sun was shining through his window, and the birds were chirping in an obnoxious manner. As he rolled onto his side, he noticed that the time was 8:43 a.m. With a yawn, he tossed his body's duvet into an untidy heap at one end of his bed. He rose and made his way to the restroom to change. After completing that, he made the decision to go downstairs to the kitchen to check who was awake. The symbiote was wearing some regular clothes. He could hear Mito talking loudly to their mother about how eager she was to go on her first assignment before he had even entered. Naruto entered through the door after she had requested Kakashi if he would be her sensei. Without taking his eyes off his smut, Kakashi replied, Sorry, Mito. I won't be your teacher, still looking after your brother, remember? But Naruto's got that weird suit now, it makes him strong. He doesn't need protecting." Mito whimpered pitifully before she voiced her displeasure. For once, Naruto expressed agreement with his sister, even saying, "I have to agree with Mito, you don't need to watch over me anymore, Kakashi." He was so startled by the man's strange eye smile that even the symbiote was taken aback when he glanced over his shoulder. "Hello, Naruto. Have you said anything?" When Kakashi asked him, Naruto merely groaned in frustration. While preparing what is known as an English breakfast, in the West, Naruto's mother looked at her son from her place at the stove. Naruto smiled and said he enjoyed eating this meal before heading to the forge. Before he sat down next to Kakashi, who was closely observing him, Naruto went over and gave her a hug and wished her a nice morning. Naruto returned his gaze, and they engaged in a gazing contest that didn't cease until Naruto's mother put lunch on the table. At that point, food started to spill everywhere as the pack of animals bit into their grub, creating an ugly mess. It was a straightforward game of who could eat more. After ruining the kitchen for the morning, Kakashi brought Naruto to the headmaster's tower to visit his father, discuss what had transpired in his dream, and find out exactly what would be done about the suit. His father looked like hell as he sat down and explained what the symbiote was and how the dream proceeded. It was clear that he had been worrying about Naruto all night and had not gotten much sleep. His dad only laughed and waved a hand at him, telling him it wasn't his fault, while he grinned pitifully and apologized. All that Naruto's father had said was, "It's the duty of a father to worry about his family." He looked his son in the eye and said, "Naruto, I'm sorry to tell you this, but Tegashi, he passed away last night." His mood shifted to one of solemn grief once everything had been spoken, which had taken at least a few hours. Naruto glanced at his father with wide eyes, his body stiffening. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. The old man was dead? What? How? The symbiote was clearly writhing about his body in a furious serpentine motion as Naruto croaked out, clutching the chair's armrests. Naruto, old age. It was only old age. We believe that the shock of the meteor impact on the town next to his home exacerbated his heart's aging process, and he died while sleeping. His sister's family has taken over the forge, and it will be closed while all of his possessions and accounts are settled. Naruto's father bowed his head in prayer to the elderly man who had essentially provided for half the community during his lifetime. The grisly old smith would not want him to weep over his death, so Naruto closed his eyes and wiped his face. He had lived a long, robust life, having dated a number of women before settling down as a blacksmith and getting married. His wife had died during the 9 Foxes release by Madara, and Tegashi had claimed that day that a part of him died with her. With a sorrowful smile, he turned back to his father and lowered his head, murmuring a prayer, hoping the old guy had arrived at some kind of afterlife and could hear him. The father of Naruto gave him a kindly smile and looked closely at his kid, who didn't appear to be much different, but he was aware that the clothes belonged to this extraterrestrial. At least it wasn't a threat, he shrugged, and it was even helping him deal with his overabundance of core energy. No more grueling extractions to prevent his son's broken core energy system from killing him. When he heard a knock on the door, he grinned at Naruto and Kakashi and said, "Well, that would be the first teams coming in for their missions." To Naruto's dismay, Kakashi and Naruto's father began laughing uncontrollably. Then, with a loud thud, Naruto's father placed a sizable stack of D-rank assignments onto his deck. After rubbing his hands together, Kakashi got up and motioned for Naruto to come after him. When Naruto's father beckoned for them to enter, the door opened, and he grinned at seeing Mito's friend and his friends Ino, Shikamaru, and Choji, who were trailing behind their teacher, whom Naruto assumed to be Asuma based on the cigarette he was smoking. He heard his father say, "Now then, we have a nice mission for you all," in a very sadistic tone until he finally burst out laughing as they were leaving. "Your quest, one that is dangerous and full of adventure, is a fence to paint." As they left the headmaster's tower, Kakashi burst out laughing uncontrollably. He asked his older brother a question and received a wink in return. "Where are we going, Kakashi?" he asked the silver-haired shinobi, flinging his hands in the air and huffing. Ma. I'm so impatient, Naruto, but we're going to train to respond to your query," the Jounin joyfully chirped. Naruto smiled genuinely for the first time in his life. He was thrilled to be able to keep the symbiote, and was about to receive training on how to use it. "I'll race you to the training fields," Naruto yelled in a demanding manner. He chuckled to himself, and chose to make fun of him by telling him, "Training Ground 7. Subconsciously, the symbiote transformed into the suit form it had used when it originally attached to the kid. Naruto was completely covered in the form-fitting attire, with the spider emblem on his chest and huge white lenses for eyes. The symbiote abruptly said, "Watch this." Naruto gazed in astonishment as his arm sprang upwards at one of the bigger buildings, shooting a web at it, and his other arm did the same to another structure. Naruto was launched into the air using the tension in the webs, and with all control returned to him, the symbiote merely said again, "Follow your instincts." Following the symbiote's instructions, he thrust out his arm and released another web, swiftly latching hold of it and swinging forward before firing off another web, swiftly web-slinging his way into the grounds where, according to Kakashi, he exclaimed joyously, "WAHOO! Kami, that symbiote sure has a few surprises in it," the man, who was standing shell-shocked by what had just happened, said as he shook his head and threw himself onto the rooftops before running away from the speeding bullet that was Naruto. The costume had peeled back over Naruto's face, revealing a smug grin. When Kakashi reached the training grounds, he discovered him standing upside down on one of the trees with his arms wrapped across his chest. "Kakashi ma. Why did it take you so long?" Naruto teased the elder man in a light-hearted way. After taking his smut out of his pocket and snorting, Kakashi said, "Well, I saw an old woman crossing the road and I dash." Really, that was a joke. With a startled cry, Naruto dropped from the tree, twisted, and landed on his feet. Confident in his newfound abilities, he walked over to Kakashi and realized that he needed the symbiote, which made him whole and allowed him to stop being a burden to his family. We are going to see exactly what your new friend can do for you and how strong you are now, who knows? Kakashi said, sighing as he closed his book and looked at Naruto. Your father may even turn you into a shinobi. With a nod, Naruto's mask reformed around his face, and he lunged at Kakashi with a speed comparable to that of a Chunin. After deflecting a blow meant for his face, Kakashi was startled to see Naruto spring off him and spin slowly into the air. Webbing was launched, hitting him in the chest and sending him hurtling in the direction of the web slinger with a powerful pull. Naruto was rewarded with a huge smoke explosion and a giant wooden plank in lieu of the senior shinobi after he crushed both soles of his feet into him. His instincts warned him that something was about to rise from the earth, and a chill went down his spine. He flipped aside and marveled as Kakashi leaped from the earth, punching the youngster where he would have been. Naruto smiled, indicating that Kakashi was taking him seriously, which was fortunate for him because he had a few more surprises planned. He instantly started shooting black symbiote blobs at Kakashi while clenching his fists and pointing his knuckles at him. Kakashi's many years of service made it easy for him to avoid them, but he had to acknowledge that the symbiote-clad Naruto had potential. After their sparring, he would have to tell Naruto about his fighting style. Shit! Kakashi thought to himself, realizing that his contemplation had left him vulnerable to an attack, which Naruto exploited. A fist nearly touched his cheek, and Naruto tried to strike him by arching his leg, but by then he had already bent down and blasted a fist into his assailant's chest. His spider sense, as he was calling it, alerted him to the attack, but it came too fast for him to respond, and Naruto launched aside, shocked by how swiftly the man had struck him. Naruto slingshot at his sparring partner, firing webs at him with both hands at a speed that Kakashi could hardly keep up with, his feet hitting the Jonin's chest with a kick that was actually quite painful because it had a lot of force behind it. Kakashi narrowed his eyes, decided that this was too much, and skidded to a stop. Before he could do anything else, he slid under Naruto and onto his feet, wrapping his arm around his neck and kicking at the back of his leg to force him down. With his other hand, he yanked Naruto's arm up his back. I give, Naruto screamed, flinching as his arm ached in protest. The symbiote laughed within his head, obviously having fun. His expression fell as Kakashi released him, and he scrambled to his feet, staring at the man as the symbiote peeled off his head. Kakashi then gave him a quick pat on the head while grinning. With a ruffle of his hair, Kakashi praised. That was actually pretty good, Naruto. After complaining and swatting the man's hand away, he raked his hand through his hair to return it to its former disheveled state, grinned at Kakashi, and said, Thank you, Kakashi. I'm happy to see some promise there. With a nod, Kakashi approached two logs on the opposite side of the little training area and took a seat on one. He then patted the log across from him to signal Naruto to join him. Still a little uncomfortable by his leg, Naruto hobbled over and collapsed on the wood, staring at Kakashi and wondering what he wanted. To be honest, I'm very shocked. When did you learn the fundamentals of hand-to-hand combat? I had no idea. The elder man replied, tilting his head to the side, and despite the kind question, he had a critical expression in the back of his eye. Naruto just shrugged. He couldn't quite put it into words, but throughout that training session, he felt as though he had spent years honing those talents, perfecting his physique for the moment when his village needed him and demonstrating that a woman could become a respectable shinobi. After the symbiote revealed one of its powers to Naruto, he blinked and nearly jumped in surprise at the last sentence. Since when had he considered himself a woman? The alien's dark, twisted whispers said, I learned from previous hosts. I give that knowledge to the new ones. It makes us stronger. Naruto blinked a few times before telling Kakashi what the symbiote had said to him. He knew that no matter how often the symbiote spoke to him, he would always feel invaded. Before addressing this new information, Kakashi massaged his chin and hummed in contemplation for a few seconds. That's quite a handy thing to have. It's like the Sharingan's ability to copy and learn spirit art, he said. Is it necessary for the entire symbiote to cover a host or just a portion of it to come into contact? It is unknown, was the creature's response to the questions posed by Kakashi and Naruto. In response to Kakashi, Naruto shuddered again and said, "It doesn't know." Kakashi shrugged, got to his feet, dusted his chest, took his adoring book, and started to go, shouting over his shoulder, "Well, I think I know enough now, Naruto. Let's report back to your father." Naruto nodded, leaped to his feet, and hurried to Kakashi, his costume changing into a hoodie featuring the white spider's emblem, basic trousers, and sneakers. Once again, they walked together to the headmaster's tower, where they informed Naruto's father of everything that had transpired during and before Training Ground 7. Yes, Kakashi was correct. Having Naruto is a really helpful tool. Since you would require both field and training experience, I'm genuinely tempted to place you as an active shinobi right now. The father of Naruto smiled and gave his son a wink. Tell you what, I'll let you know next week if I think it's a good idea. The sheer joy nearly made Naruto want to jump about the room, and the symbiote, if it had a mouth, would have smiled maniacally. The remainder of the day was an absolute blast. Naruto made Kakashi teach him all kinds of hand-to-hand fighting, and to his elation, the symbiote informed him that while it couldn't perform full-fledged spirit art like the Uchiha's Grand Fireball technique, it could let him use his natural affinities, which turned out to be wind, the same affinity his father possessed. It was late, and Naruto, who was covered in the symbiote, sat down on the carved monument of his father's head and looked down at the hamlet. He felt a twinge of envy and remorse that he had not felt in the previous days, and he would still be a blacksmith if it weren't for the symbiote. Yes, the slithering, cunning voice hissed. They only care about you now because of me and us, but I will always love you, my dear host. He shuddered again, a little startled by the alien's abrupt proclamation of love. He should have been shocked, perhaps worried, but he wasn't. The symbiote had no hidden goals toward him. It was honest, something these people didn't get. The voice of a young woman screamed loudly. He snapped his head down and to the right, sharpening his vision a little bit on the village's poorer areas. He got up from where he was standing and saw two big male shapes battling a smaller, leaner one, and he realized that this woman was being attacked by a group of scumbags who were determined to rape her. After leaping off the carving, he spun around before straightening out and plunging toward the ground. As he fell more quickly, he swung his fist, sending a strand of black web that hit a building. He threw himself forward and around a corner, slinging webs as he approached the scene. Concerned about the woman's distress, Naruto swung with greater force, closing in faster as he mulled over various scenarios in his mind, dreading what the victim was going through, either a rape or a mugging, and thought icily, "Where are the Uchiha police force? Isn't it their job to make sure these kinds of things don't happen?" He lost no time in taking action as he swung into the alleyway and flung himself at the nearest villain, drop-kicking him as he flew through the air with both feet firmly planted against his chest. The man rocketed off into a wall like a pinball. When the black-clad vigilante suddenly appeared, the other criminal gaped in surprise. The tall, acrobatically thin man had a toned athletic form, as seen by the visible muscle outlines in his skin-tight attire. It was nearly impossible to identify the hero as he talked in a gravelly voice. "So you fuckers think you can just grab any innocent person in MY streets and abuse them?" He snarled and advanced on the man, his fists clenched hard, slightly bent forward in a genuinely menacing stance. The man trembled in terror and let go of the woman, who had fled behind the hero and was cowering behind the formidable, powerful man. He took another step in the direction of the man who looked like a pig, then struck out with a punch that struck the man's left cheek, breaking the bone and sending him flying into the wall closet. The force was so great that the man's head lodged firmly in it, brain matter and blood caking it. Naruto had not even intended to punch the man that hard, just hard enough to leave some life-altering decisions in his mind, and he wanted the scumbag to suffer more before he was turned over to the Uchiha Police Department for due process. Both hero and woman stared in shock, unable to comprehend what had just happened. "Whoops, now I really need to be careful with my abilities, OF," he muttered in shock after blinking and scratching his head. The woman he had just saved interrupted his little tirade, clenching her fist around his chest and yelling, thank you. Whoever you are, thank you." With amber eyes and tear-smeared makeup, the woman looked up at Naruto as he carefully removed her arms from around his chest and put his hands on her shoulders to reassure her that everything would be okay. "Hey, hello." He smiled under the mask and said, "It's okay, you're safe now." He could get used to this saving people business. The woman gave a shy smile, but she recoiled when she heard the other man, who had just woken up, groan and stagger to his feet, unaware of what had transpired. When Atabi saw his best friend Itabi's broken head splattered against a wall, his face turned pale. He shouted out in mortified fear and shed tears for a person who would never be remembered and would not deserve to be. He was just about smart enough to figure out what had happened. Somehow this clown had managed to get a surprise hit on him that had somehow launched him across the alley before slamming his friend's head through a wall, as his eyes snapped to the clothed hero and the woman who was to be their victim. "I'll cut you up something nice, you son of a whore!" Pulling a crude-looking knife from his pocket, the man screamed and charged at Naruto, sounding like something out of this planet. When the man attempted to jab at Naruto's chest, Naruto mockingly laughed, twisted on his feet, and ran towards him. When Atabi attempted to turn and slash at him, he responded by flipping his over the man, landing behind him, grabbing hold of the man's hand and dislocating it with a simple twist, then stepping forward and bringing the man's arm upwards and stepping under it. Before lowering it again and turning, he rammed his palm into Atabi's elbow, breaking his arm entirely and making it stay straight. He reached out and tried to grab Naruto's face with his good hand, but Naruto reacted faster, grabbing his throat and using his superhuman strength to lift the man back into the air before slamming into the ground. He then crouched down on the prone man's chest before slamming his fist into his jaw, dislocating and knocking him out. He watched the man on the ground, debating whether or not to murder him. Then he snapped out of his dark thoughts and turned to face the woman, who was once again in shock and terror at what Naruto had done. Thank you, Mr. Vigilante," the woman whispered shyly, clutching at herself and trembling from the cold, not quite sure if this was real or if she had withdrawn into her thoughts to try to rescue herself from a probable and terrible alternative. "You're more than welcome, Mississippi." He talked with fervent passion, sounding both like a politician and a hero. "I can't stand behind and just let some degenerate low-lives take advantage of the wonderful people of this city." She gave a quiet smile, which was cheesy but comforting. A real-life hero had saved her, and she was glad he had found her at the right time. He resembled the heroes of her childhood cartoons and comic books so much that the best part about him was how ridiculous he was. He approached the woman cautiously, putting a light hand on her shoulder and looking her in the eye before saying in a soothing voice, "How about we get you home where you're safe?" The woman blushed and nodded, wondering how he would get her home. When he put an arm around her waist, she stiffened like a washboard, her terrified reflexes reviving as she questioned why he was becoming so intimate with her. When she realized he was, web-slinging, out of the alleyway, she let out a startled shout in response to her own inquiry. Her anxieties were allayed when he said, "Hold on tight, miss, whereabout is home?" "Near the meteor impact zone, Merchant District," she squeaked out in disbelief as she watched curiously and adventurously as she soared through the air by the spider like a hero. She had never seen the city from this height before, and to be honest, it was simply breathtaking, She was jealous of this man and his ability to see the city like this every day and night. Although there was a lot of traffic when you were slinging through the air using buildings as velocity, it didn't take long to go from the alleyway to her house. She grinned broadly as they slowly rappelled down to her front door. When she fumbled in her handbag for her front door keys and turned to see the hero watching her protectively to make sure she went in without any problems, she paused just before inserting the key into the door and found the strength to give her hero one final act of gratitude. Naruto was so engrossed in his own world that he was unaware that the woman had come close to him. He practically leaped out of his skin when he felt her kiss him on his cheek, which was covered in symbiote. The unexpected kiss caused him to yell and tumble backwards. He hadn't even anticipated it. She leaned down and gave him a hand up while giggling gently. He graciously accepted it and stood back up, scratching the back of his head as he smiled nervously at that ridiculous response. Thanks, miss," Naruto stammered, trying to avoid eye contact while hunching forward and pressing his index fingers together. After giving the hero a final embrace, the girl awed quietly to herself and joyfully chirped into his ear, saying, "Thank you so much. Who are you, my savior?" "A name, you idiot, you haven't picked a name. Quickly think of something." Naruto froze and nearly smacked himself. "Spider-Man! What, really? That's the best you could come up with? That was a bit lame," Naruto blurted out abruptly, blinking and jerking back slightly. His head had a ticked-off mark on it. His symbiote had just sneered at him. "Well, I'd like to see you come up with something," he angrily said to the symbiote in his mind. Knowing that he had just thought of the term on the spot, the girl laughed and snorted. "Okay, Spider-Man, thank you again. When the stations open tomorrow, I'll submit a police report. Once again, I appreciate your assistance." Naruto nodded again and said, "I'm glad to assist, Mississippi. It's all in a day's work." Then he slinged himself away, pivoted, and leaped into the air. With a gentle grin, the woman turned back to the door, opened it, and entered her house. A quite curvy, sexy woman was squatting on the roofs above them, discreetly examining them. She was wearing a skin-tight black catsuit with a deep V-neck that revealed her rather large chest, long, curly, white hair, a black domino mask on her face, and ruby red lips. As she stood up straight, she looked down at the woman's house and then laughed. She was really looking forward to their meeting, so she channeled core energy into her legs before jumping off the roof she was on onto another a block away, ninja running to her hideout within the city. She purred to herself, interested in this rather delicious-looking man dressed in a rather form-fitting suit. Spider-Man was the city's first hero, while Black Cat was its first flamboyant villain.